Something that you hear in the rooms of recovery and rehab all the time is that this disease absolutely does not discriminate. There are some meetings up here in the mountains where I am in Colorado, and there's a guy that always says, you know, from Yale to jail, you'll find him in Vail. You know, for me, it's alcoholism. Family disease, for sure, but it's also, like, not the reason how I ended up at the Betty Ford Center, you know? But I, like, kind of started drinking later in life, like college, and from the get-go, booze and drugs were, like, kind of a solution for me, you know? They loosened me up, they helped connect me to people, and in a lot of ways, it served me for a while until that absolute addict, alcoholic mentality started controlling me.
Welcome to another episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Dusick. I was the founding drummer of Maroon 5, but I'm now a licensed therapist, author, and mental health advocate. On today's show, we're having a conversation with an old buddy of mine, musician and music school owner, Davis Rowan, who's joining us today for an interview and some catching up. But as always, we have my co-host, Duck Maylard. How you doing, Duck?
I'd like to own a music school, but I feel like I would really suffer from that imposter syndrome of, like, this 9-year-old is a better guitar player than me. So what could I possibly teach him? It's the same reason why I'm so wary of being a baseball coach, because, like, I don't want to teach somebody the proper pitching method and have them, you know, screw them up. So I don't know. I think I'll just stay on the sidelines and cheer them, you know, cheer the musicians.
Yeah, no, I could feel that for sure. That's something I run into as somebody, not just as somebody who's played music for a long time, but somebody who obviously achieved things that most people don't. Mm-hmm. Is that so often I'm around other musicians that I'm like, this person is so much better than me and younger and probably will never have the kind of success that I had. And I almost feel like, it's not survivor's guilt, but success guilt. Yeah. It's like, why did I get to that level? This person could certainly deserve it more than
let me tell you, from the other side, I think success guilt is probably better because, you know, a lot of times I go, I'm better than that guy, and he's in a movie and I'm not. So it works the other way too. But
better than resentment.
I try not to be resentful. I reserve that for obviously terrible actors that just fell into a role or a job, and those people I can be resentful and bitter about. But the rest I try.
On the other end of things, I do feel like the world has missed out on me not coaching a little league team.
That would be spectacular. Yeah. If for no other reason than, you know, your dad would show up and try to coach behind you.
Well, that would become a whole other exercise in and of itself of having to set boundaries.
Right. I think that might be a reality show. The Dusicks, coaching with the Dusicks.
Right. But. So, as I said in the intro, you know, our guest today is an old buddy of mine, and this is kind of a new, unique twist on having a guest on. I mean, we've had obviously artists and performers before. Mm-hmm. We've had people that are successful in different regards, and we've had some addiction recovery stories. We're not, you know, primarily focused on just that, but it comes up a lot given my background and some of these stories. But this is someone that I have, you know, a shared history with in that regard. So a little different twist.
In that you guys were in rehab together, right? That's where you guys met.
Yeah, we met at the Betty Ford Center in 2016. If I remember correctly, he came in probably halfway through the time that I was there, maybe a couple weeks into when I was there. And he was just one of those people that I bonded with pretty quickly. You know, he's a drummer. There's only so many musicians in there. He was another drummer. And he was really sweet, just a really down-to-earth, friendly guy. You've met him. He's just he's so great. And I think, you know, it's interesting to reflect on that now because, you know, we've talked a few times, but we haven't been, you know, in each other's lives consistently. And at the time it was 2016, so I would have been 38, and he was probably, I don't know how old he is now, but he's probably 10 years younger than me. He was like maybe 27, something like that at the time. And so having that natural connection with music and the drums, and him being younger and him coming in like 2 weeks after me of you know, I had like 2 weeks of sobriety or whatever it was. I think I felt a little bit of like a big brother energy, or fatherly or something. Like I wanted to take him under my wing. I felt some like responsibility to like give him a good experience of rehab because I was having a good experience.
Yeah.
I don't know if he felt that at all. I kind of wish that I had asked him that.
Well, I mean, we do get into a little bit of your feeling of, well, I have to be, like you say, what the guys were when I showed up. And so I think you touch upon that need to like take them under your wing and I'll show you how it works, kid, you know, that kind of energy.
Yeah, but also like I just in life, I think not entirely generationally separate, but
Right.
like just young enough that you feel like, oh, look, I've been around the block a few times more than you. Let me share with you some perspective. Like I had any perspective to share at that point.
2 weeks.
Yeah, yeah. But but it was. I think that was a good thing for me at the time. You know, it was a good thing to take on that big brother energy. You know, that brought out a good side of me and to feel a certain amount of goodwill. You know, because I was so self-obsessed going into that experience and primarily concerned with how I was feeling all the time. So the fact that I already was thinking about how this younger guy was feeling and whether he was having a good experience.
Well, you've talked so many times on this show about, and even our conversation a couple weeks ago about starting over and what was the turning point. And you alluded to telling your story in AA meetings and rehab, and people come up and saying, you have a great handle on this. You should maybe think about this, you know, helping other people. Do you feel like maybe that was the origin of that? Like not Davis specifically, but 2 weeks into rehab, starting to already start to feel, how can I turn this and help other people with this? Like, was that the moment, that aha moment for you a little bit?
Yeah, that was definitely the genesis of this feeling of maybe I have something to offer, not in spite of everything I've been through, but because of everything that I've been through.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, those kind of relationships that you experience in rehab can be really meaningful in that way. And it's funny. I mean, you know, you meet a lot of people and you bond with the people around you. And I think a lot of times you have these romantic notions of like, these are going to be my friends forever. And in reality, it doesn't usually work out that way. Like people serve a certain function at that moment in your life and you bond because you have a shared trauma and a shared challenge and you're just thrust into this situation together, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest or something like that, you know?
Well, I don't want to say anything, but that's what I'm picturing in my mind.
Well, there were, you know, you see all these different kinds of personalities, and there are those people that you think right away. My roommate in particular leaps to mind that you're like, yeah, this person's not going to make it. You know, they're not going to last long. You can imagine them on the way to the airport when they get out, like hitting up the bar. And, and then there are those other people that you're like, you know what, this person, I would bet my life savings that they're going to make it. And just, you know, everyone has a little particular specific place in that experience, because I think when you look at people that are doing really well and even better than you, it inspires you and you feel, wow, that person has only been here like a week or two longer than me, but they seem like they're doing so well. And if I just can get a little bit of whatever they're doing, whatever they're getting, maybe I'll be okay too. And then even the people that you look at that are really struggling, that you're like, oh man, they're so in denial. They have a long way to go. I don't think they're going to get it this time, if ever. That in and of itself can be inspiring too, because you're like, thank God I'm not there. You know, I can see that even as bad a place that I've been in that brought me into rehab, it could be worse. I could be here and not recognize that I really need to be here and use this opportunity to help myself. So I could see, like, of all the different personalities and the different people. So, I mean, this is Betty Ford Center in Southern California. You had, you know, wealthy conservative business owner types from Orange County, for instance, that were there that I had really nothing in common with. And we're together sharing this experience. And then people that were there was one guy that like owned and operated a car dealership in Oklahoma City and had flown out on a big scale. Like if his rich friend had flown him out on his private jet. And I remember him saying like, oh, you think Hollywood's bad. You think, you know, there was an attorney in the group. He's like, you think attorneys drink a lot and musicians do lots of drugs, whatever. The car dealership scene out in Oklahoma City is the Wild West, man.
Literally. Wow.
And so it's just these crazy kind of like, where else would I ever come in contact with this person and have a situation where I'm learning something from them and they're learning something from me, and we share something that is mutually supportive. And I don't know, I always say, like, I would do it again if I could. It was such a positive experience, not just in terms of getting sober, but you recognize that we have more in common than we think, even though we so often see our differences more than our similarities. When you're all in one place for one reason, despite all of your differences and backgrounds and belief systems and religion or anything, and you're bonded by that one thing, you see the similarities more.
Yeah. I'm not sure if we've talked too much about your experience. I mean, obviously, it's a through line in all your discussion of sobriety and stuff, but specifically your experience in going to Betty Ford, because I have to assume that for people who aren't going to the Betty Ford clinic, it might be maybe not quite as cushy. It might be a little bit more terrifying if it's a real medical necessity to, like, you're out of the hospital and right into rehab and you're DTing and stuff. Can you talk a little bit about, like, literally the admission process, like the day you got there, like what that was like, and when you started to let your guard down and start to embrace the community and things? Or was that something right away you were willing to do or excited to do? Like, what was it like?
Well, remember, I had two different experiences because I actually checked myself into rehab on two different occasions. The first time didn't take, obviously. But that was the first time. It was Pasadena Recovery Center, which people may remember was on the show Celebrity Rehab with Dr. Drew.
Good old Dr. Drew.
And I will freely admit that was a choice I made while drinking and watching Celebrity Rehab with Dr. Drew.
No way.
Yes.
I want to go there.
Yeah, it's sort of the face for me. No, I mean, I think I was like a day out, like feeling really sick and hungover and probably borderline having DTs, and in desperation, the only place I could think of in my mind that I needed to be was the Pasadena Recovery Center, because I'd seen it on TV and I was like, maybe there's other people like me there. And I very distinctly remember, showing up and just, I mean, you're already nervous to do something like that when you're in the middle of alcohol withdrawal and you're doing all that. It was nerve-wracking. They were very sweet, and they sat with me and they asked all the questions, but I was like, on the verge of like a panic attack or something worse. Now, that was not the right place for me, and it was more like what you're describing. I thought it was going to be a cushy Hollywood type of place, and it was not that. I don't know if it was that at one point and had gone downhill. That was what I'd heard at the time, but I don't want to besmirch anyone. It was a little scary, and there were some scary people there, and the experience when I came in was like, wow, I came in here to get off drugs, and I've never seen more people on drugs in my life. Like everyone, it seemed like everyone was either, I couldn't even really tell like how many people were going through withdrawals, how many people were heavily medicated, and how many people were just maybe crazy, like had something else going on, because there were some really alarming things that I saw that I had never seen. And so of course, like the first week I was like, get me out of here. This is not the place for me. It actually ended up being a good experience. I was only there for 3 or 4 weeks and I learned a lot, and it was like dipping my toe into the experience. I know that it gets worse than that. I mean, there are places that are downright scary.
Right.
And people, court-ordered kind of places that feel like prison, and you're there because you have to be there, not by choice. And so it really does run the gamut. Now, that's all context to say that when I went to the Betty Ford Center, I had a very different experience that I was very grateful for the ways in which it was comfortable. But even in that situation, I remember a lot of these more wealthy people saying like, oh, the Betty Ford Center has gone downhill. It's not like it used to be. I mean, 10 years ago, they used to have massages and acupuncture, blah, blah, blah. And the sheets were nicer. And I'm like, if you're complaining about the sheets and you're saying the Betty Ford Center is not what it used to be, like, you clearly don't get it. Like,
they don't even have a seaweed wrap anymore. I mean, what are we doing here?
But I remember that being, again, another example of something that I would hear and think to myself, God, I'm so grateful that I'm not in that place. Mm-hmm. Because here I am eternally grateful to be having the experience that I'm having and gaining what I'm gaining. And I'm going to take everything from it that I need and that I want to get from it. Like, I'm not going to complain about the food or the sheets or I'm like, this is to save my life. And so, like, even hearing that BS or that like disconnect from the reality of the situation was helpful to me. When I checked in, I had been drinking heavily, and I tried to not make the same mistake I made the first time, which was to show up already in withdrawals and then have no doctor on site there to take care of me, which is what happened at PRC. And the first night I ended up in the ER when I went to PRC because they didn't know, there was no doctor on site. I was going through like DTs. They just took me to ER and dropped me off and said, good luck. Yeah. And so I sat there like shaking for 5 hours in the Pasadena hospital ER before they admitted me and gave me some benzos. And that started a whole other part of my journey.
So you prepared for Betty Ford. You got a nice buzz on and...
Well, we couldn't get a bed for like a couple days. And so I was like, well, maybe this time I'll just keep drinking until I get there. And I know they have a detox wing there. So I'll just hand the keys over to them and let them take over. And my partner at the time said, okay, but maybe just lay off the hard liquor if you could. So I got a case of wine and I drank all of it, I think, in like 48 hours. And I showed up and they took my blood alcohol. I had, my last sip out of a thermos in the car in the parking lot of the Betty Ford. I remember going into the intake. I remember them asking me questions and I was in very good spirits. Apparently, I vaguely remember this. The person who was doing the intake in her little office had music playing in the background. And at one point, an Adele song came on, which was like the big record at the time, of course, right? She was the biggest artist. And I remember just kind of like singing along and apparently going, I love Adele.
I thought you were totally going to say, and a Maroon 5 song came on.
Oh, no, that would have been, I probably would have walked out.
Yeah.
It was like, no, but so they kept taking my blood alcohol and it kept going up because I had just drank. And so finally, and I wasn't making any sense. I was not coherent enough to finish the intake. So eventually, I don't remember this part. They just took me to a room and laid me down in one of the detox rooms. And I woke up and I had no idea where I was. I was very confused and shaking and terrified. And I looked out like the door of my room down the hallway and I couldn't figure out which way I came in. I didn't have any like perspective of how big the place was or like where I would go to find a nurse or something. Mm-hmm. So I was just like, hello? It turns out it was not that big a place. The nurse station was right around the corner. And once I got situated, it took me about 24 hours to feel like I was being well cared for. And but same thing, I called the first night. It's scary. I called my partner back home and was like, I don't think I belong here. I think I want to go home. And thankfully, she said, just give it another night, just see how you feel tomorrow. And within 48 hours, I was pretty acclimated to the process. And then they moved me over to the dorm once I was sort of stabilized. And then it shifted. It was kind of sink or swim. You have to get with the program pretty quickly. I remember going the day that they moved me over to the dorm, like the first thing, they handed me the itinerary, like there's the lecture hall, there's the cafeteria. And they said, oh, it's time for yoga. And I'm like still like wobbling, like 48 hours off of alcohol, and they had me on, I think, Valium probably at that point.
That's what I was going to ask you. Did they give you any medication to deal with the DTs at all?
Yeah, they gave me some Valium, and they gave me some blood pressure medication to because my blood pressure was through the roof.
Yeah.
They gave me stuff for my blood sugar and all that stuff. And so, but it's not like you all of a sudden feel just normal.
Right.
I mean, I felt kind of wobbly and out of it and shaky. And so now I'm in yoga, like swinging side to side and like feeling like I'm going to fall over. But it's like, I think you're more capable than you think you are in that moment. And that was kind of the idea, is like, all right, just join the program. Let's get with it. And then after this, we're going to get something to eat, and you're going to sit in a lecture, and then we're going to do an AA meeting, and then you're going to do group therapy, and then you're going to do meditation. And you just have to kind of like hit the ground running, which was nerve-wracking, but it was better than just sitting around twiddling my thumbs and thinking about everything.
Is there any downtime initially, or do they keep you busy to keep you busy?
They keep you pretty busy, but there is they work into your itinerary, like I think it was in the afternoon, like after lunch, a period that they called self-care, which means like, here's where you start to figure out how to take care of yourself, because you're not going to go home and have everyone's, everything structured for your whole life, every hour of your day. So here's the 1 or 2 hours of your day that you're going to have to figure out, like, what is self-care for you in this time? And it was the Betty Ford Center. They had a pool and they had a gym. And so I would go to the gym. I had a lot of nervous energy going. So I'd usually, if I had free time, I'd go to the gym and burn off some steam. A little later on, towards the end, I could actually relax and sit by the pool and maybe take a dip. But we did. I mean, every day was highly structured, and it started usually morning meds, and then you need to eat something before you're in lecture, and you have some kind of exercise or whatever. And even at the end of the day, like after dinner, you go back to the lecture hall for an AA meeting, and then you go back to the dorm and do a group-led meeting with no therapist or anything. It was just the people who had been there the longest ran the group, and
cool.
The newcomers had to sort of acclimate. And that, to me, was my favorite part, because it was communal and it was connecting, and it was my peers. And I remember like the very first night that I was in there, we were graduating the seniors, and just like going like, wow, these people have come so far. I mean, they'd probably been there for a month. And so, every single element of it had something to offer me that was connecting, and it was really cool.
And then you met Davis.
And then I met Davis, who who was, he was just a lovely guy, and we obviously had a lot in common, and it gave me a project.
Yeah, and we didn't even we didn't get to it, but we saw him a couple weeks ago here in LA playing with the David Duchovny band. He's the drummer for David Duchovny, and such a cool night to see David up there singing and Davis back there drumming on. It's great.
Yeah, Davis is a professional drummer. He's a performing musician. I mean, that's no easy feat, as you know, as an actor, as a musician, to get a paycheck performing is something that, anyone who goes into it dreams of, but most don't achieve. So, he's a high caliber musician, and he's been able to turn the connection between that background in music and his experience in addiction recovery to benefit the ways in which he teaches and coaches young people about music. And so it's just so great to hear stories like this, where you see what can come from the struggles and overcoming them.
And it's a great, I love to see the parallels between the two of you, the way you both turned those experiences into something that you can share with the community, with the future, people that you interact with. So it's great to see, and it's a great conversation to hear you guys reconnect.
Let's jump into it.
Yeah.
All right. So without any further ado, here's our conversation with my old buddy, Davis Rowan, right here on the Harder to Breathe podcast. Hey, if you like what you're hearing on this episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast, take a moment and subscribe to the show, press that like button, and leave a comment in the comments section. If you want to reach us directly, you can also email us at hardertobreathepodcast@gmail.com. Now back to the show. Hey, Davis, good to see you again.
Yeah, good seeing you both.
Davis, as you know, we met in Rehab, of all places.
Let's get right to it.
Yeah, nice. Clearly on a winning streak.
Yeah.
Right. It's interesting to reflect, how your life takes these turns and people that come into your life at certain moments and what they represent at that moment and how that might change over time. And it's so great to see you doing so well and to see you in a different context. And it's just lovely to be in contact with you after all this time, man.
Oh, likewise. I mean, gosh, I saw you guys 2 weeks ago. Was that 2 weeks ago? Mm-hmm. And maybe 3 weeks ago in LA. And Ryan, prior to that, I don't think I'd seen you in like 8 years or something.
Wow.
Yeah, after we got out, we were at the Betty Ford Center, and after that, I did meet up with you in New York once upon a time, and in the city, and that was nice. It was interesting the other night when we went out and we got to see you perform, which was great because we talked a lot about the drums and our influences and stuff when we were together, and then actually finally getting to see you perform. But it was also just interesting to kind of get a different perspective because you're in a different place in your life now. And I'm curious, like, I remember when we met thinking, you meet people in rehab and you think to yourself, some of these people are like, oh yeah, they belong here. And then other people, you're like, what's this guy doing here? And I remember meeting your parents, and they were such lovely people and so supportive and connected to you. And you're just a very, very sweet human being, and your energy is really positive. And I couldn't really figure out like how somebody like you ended up with a problem that landed you there. And I know that we probably bonded in that way because I think a lot of people probably thought the same thing about me. So, I mean, if you're up for it, do you have like a sense as to how you got to that place in your life? I mean, was it the life of a musician and being around, alcohol all the time? I don't want to lead the witness too much, but where did that end up?
Totally. That's a great question. I mean, something that you hear in the rooms of recovery and rehab all the time is that this disease absolutely does not discriminate. There are some meetings up here in the mountains where I am in Colorado, and there's a guy that always says, from Yale to jail, you'll find him in Vail. So
that's funny.
So it is, for me, it's alcoholism. I don't think we've said that yet, but family disease for sure. And the more folks I talk to, the more I realize it seems to be a family disease all over. Like everyone has some sort of alcoholic or addict in their family. And for me, that certainly is true, but that's also like not the reason how I ended up at the Betty Ford Center, But I like kind of started drinking later in life, like college. And from the get-go, booze and drugs were like kind of a solution for me, They loosened me up. They helped connect me to people, and in a lot of ways, it served me for a while until that absolute addict, alcoholic mentality started controlling me.
Yeah, for sure. Let's back up for a second because, the drums obviously is a big part of your story, and I want to give the context for that. What age did you start playing the drums? What did that serve in your life? I imagine it was before the alcohol.
Yeah, absolutely. I started playing drums when I was 7 or 8 or something, and
And I'm glad it was before the alcohol.
that
would have been really troubling.
Well, you'd be surprised. You hear some crazy
True.
stories sometimes.
It's true.
But yeah, I started playing drums when I was around like 7 or 8 and became pretty obsessed with it pretty quickly. I think there was something like deeply empowering for me about making all of that noise. And then when I became a teen, that started connecting me to other people. I started finding like bass players and guitar players and started a little punk band in middle school, and it's like that started a little micro community for me with something that made sense to me. And as a pretty quiet kid, there was something like deeply, deeply empowering about playing like loud punk rock music and watching it like bring a lot of people together.
Yeah. Yeah, that was definitely, I can relate to that a lot because I was a shy kid as well, pretty quiet. And first and foremost, banging on the drums was an act of sort of release and aggression. Yeah, so playing the drums was, an act of aggression as much as it was a musical performance for me at that age. It was getting out the teenage angst, but it was also what you described. It was connection. It was bringing me together with not just my heroes, the people that I was emulating, but very literally the people around me that also appreciated that music that I could play with. And I'm sure that the people listening to us at that point probably weren't having the same feeling because it was just noise, but it was definitely community, as you described.
There's something to that. There's something to that time frame and that age. I mean, I that was the age when I started. My drummer friend started taking me to like underground hardcore shows in like church basements. They'd like rent out the halls. I mean, and it was loud and sweaty, and we were crowd surfing and hitting the like drop ceiling. But it was like the most visceral. It was exactly what you needed. Like 13, you're like, this is the most, how have I lived without this? And granted, I didn't grow up loving hardcore and punk, but it didn't matter. It was the energy of that time of your life. So I can understand why that would strike a chord with both of you guys, because it's something about getting that teenage, like, out of your body, and onto the floor. So I can relate as well.
Absolutely. Those I too used to go to a bunch of shows in church basements.
Yeah.
And it was the best. And the arts obviously are not treated like the football team or lacrosse team in a lot of little suburban towns. So there was something a little bit rebellious about it.
Absolutely.
And meeting up with the friends on a Friday night and going into a church basement and
knocking the drop ceiling down.
Mosh pits and just, having fun and connecting with folks, It's like kind of a big straight edge scene around that where I grew up in Maryland also,
For sure. Now, for me looking back, I can recognize that there were things going on inside of me that I wasn't aware of, that was sort of the remedy for. The music was my coping mechanism. It was my source of connection, as we talked about. And I was getting out. It's weird. I was a shy and anxious kid, socially anxious, but on stage I felt powerful. You described it as being so empowering. I look back at the problems that I had later on in my life, and I could see the connection, the through line of things that were kind of underneath the surface at that point. When you look at the arc of your addiction later in your 20s, do you see anything in that time period that was like something that you were escaping from or dealing with that was under the surface, or was it something that arose later?
1,000%. I mean, I think in a lot of ways I lucked out to use music as a coping mechanism for certain things. But with the gift of hindsight now, I think it could have been avoidance. As helpful as it is and was for me to like get frustrated with something, go down to the basement, put on a pair of headphones and play along to a Green Day record and cry, whatever was going on. Perhaps there were some other coping mechanisms that could have helped me deal with some things in a better way. or confronting certain social situations without like retreating to my instrument. You know what I mean?
So when did the drums become like a serious thing? When did it become music might be a path for me?
Probably, like I said, I was like pretty obsessed with it from a young age. But when I was in high school, there were a few moments that made me realize, like, like, you know, maybe this could be a little bit more than just playing the church basements with friends. And you know, for me, it was kind of getting into jazz of all things. I had a really great teacher named Frank Rousseau and Larry Rodbell, who are from the Baltimore area. And you know, I started getting like really serious about my study, and you know, that had some external accolades and like making an all-state jazz band, and starting to realize, oh, wait a second, I could like get a scholarship to go to college for this, you know. And I think that kind of started making me realize that there could be a path forward into something professional. And you know, I will say another big turning point for me was like right around age 13. I was diagnosed with a heart condition, it called long QT syndrome. And the doctors at the time were, you know, they said no competitive sports. And for me, I was like psyched, because I was at this pivotal moment, right? I was at this pivotal moment where it was like, I love music so much, but I am getting all sorts of pressure to continue sports in this like little suburban town in Maryland. And it made the decision for me. You know, couldn't do the competitive sports anymore, but I could pour everything that I have into music.
That's interesting. I think that a lot of artists, probably the three of us speaking today, and many others listening, it starts out that way, where it's a passion, something that is some kind of coping style, where you invest yourself in it because it's just viscerally rewarding. But then when you realize that you have some talent and you get maybe some accolades or some attention around it, then it becomes self-esteem, it becomes identity, it becomes something you want to dive into even more, because it's lifting you up in a way that nothing else has. It makes you feel like you have something to offer and have purpose. And so that brings us up to the moment you were describing in college. You're in that place now where you have this identity, and it's wrapped up in music, and that's you've devoted yourself to that pretty wholeheartedly. So what does your life look like at that point?
Yeah, I went to music school up in Boston, pretty serious music school. And, you know, it was like pretty intense to go from little suburban town to this school with kids from all over the world that are like super talented.
Yeah.
Super invested in like practicing all the time and mastering their craft, which was like both a really inspiring place to be and intimidating, you know? So like, I think a lot of artists kind of struggle with like imposter syndrome a little bit. You show up to a place like that and you're like, man, what am I doing here? Like all these folks are playing circles around me. And for me, that did like light a fire under my ass and make me work really hard. You know, I like just freaking practicing all the time. My first year at Berkeley. And you know, looking back, maybe that was a little bit of like this addict, alcoholic mentality where it's like more is better, you know. And I was just like in the practice rooms for 8 hours a day, and like I think my sophomore year, like my third semester, ended up with tendinitis.
Oh, wow.
Which I know that, you know, that's something that you have dealt with, Ryan, if I remember correctly. Something similar with your shoulder. But, you know, it's like a classic example of my body telling me something and me not listening. Right. You know, like some pain in my forearms, and I'm like, oh, well, you know, look at what's going on around me. I gotta work harder than everyone else. I gotta work more than everyone else. And you know, it got to the point where like I like woke up in the middle of the night and like grabbed a glass of water and had this like shooting pain down my forearm. Dropped it and it shattered on the ground, you know. Oh. And that was like oh, okay, I got to do something about this. This is kind of serious, you know.
Yeah.
Had to switch all my classes to be like non-performance for a little bit, and then ultimately had a really great teacher that helped me like relax my body and change my grip a little bit to help me play more naturally behind the drum set to avoid injury.
Wow. Yeah. See, that's what I needed.
I was going to
at
say,
that
Rye,
moment.
wouldn't that have been nice fun to have a teacher?
Yeah.
Yeah, that wasn't really an option for me to go into non-performative, whatever.
Yeah,
I was, in the middle of, we got to play the Enormo Dome tomorrow.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah, but that is a testament to. I've talked. We had one. I think, Duck. We had one recent episode. Where it was just the two of us talking about drumming or learning to play an instrument and how much of it is beneficial to do it by the book and how much is beneficial to do it your own way. And I think there's a happy medium between those things where it's nice to find your own style and explore and not be hindered by the way you're quote unquote supposed to do it.
Right.
But at the same time, it is so necessary, especially with the drums being such a demanding physical instrument, to learn the things that will prevent an injury in the first place, or one from escalating to something really long term and debilitating.
Have somebody set you on the right path and then set you free and let you spread your wings on your own, but at least set you the right way to get started so you don't hurt yourself.
For sure. I think that's what a good teacher does is, teaches in a way that lays the tools out in front of you, but then allows you to make it your own and doesn't squash the creativity by forcing you to look at a frickin' book all day long, reading notes. Gotcha. You know what I mean?
Right. I'm tempted to jump ahead to your present position, but I'm going to save that for later.
Sure.
So thankfully you have some good instruction. You're dealing with some imposter syndrome, and it's a very demanding situation. The movie that leaps to mind is Whiplash, of course.
I didn't want to say it, but...
And then you mentioned alcohol is, most people in college start drinking more, or it becomes a social thing. What role do you think it served amidst all of that at that moment in your life?
That's a great question. I don't know that it was directly related to like the rigors of being in music school, but rather like the social interactions that I was having. I didn't like really start drinking until college. And as I mentioned earlier, it was like it's like a bit of a solution for me. I would get like really anxious before going out to social events and things like this, and like drinking a little bit, it like helped, quite frankly. And it's something that you hear a lot within the various forms of recovery is like, alcohol or drugs. It's like it worked until it didn't.
Yeah.
And that like certainly reigns true for me is, it worked. It was like super helpful, maybe even saved me from some like more harmful situations from a mental health standpoint. And then, ultimately it just like wasn't doing that for me anymore and became very obvious that it was like something that I needed to stop doing altogether.
Was that something that became apparent in college, or was it after?
It became apparent in college. I spent a lot of time like noticing that it could potentially be an issue, right? Something bad. Yeah, like something bad would happen, or like I would have too much to drink, or I would drink alone and I'd be like, whoa, like can't do that, So then it was kind of like this white knuckling way of living where, I would go weeks and sometimes months in college without really drinking. And, over time, it's like the amount of time that I could string together on my own sheer willpower just like shrunk and shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. Yeah.
I can deeply relate to what you were describing in terms of the positive aspects of drinking. And I think it's important to reflect on for me personally, but I think for people to hear, we have, with most things, we have this binary way of thinking. And in my mind, I've had to think of my relationship with alcohol as all negative, as a way of maintaining my current relationship with it, which is that it doesn't serve me at all. It has no function in my life. I need to stay away from it completely. But I think that there's nuance to these things, and there's a reason why we fell in love with that substance in the first place. To say like it served no function whatsoever that's not truth. I think that for me, I was really, really struggling because I was a very uptight young man and had a hard time connecting with people, feeling present in social situations, and just letting loose at all and enjoying myself. Like the drums, that was the one place where I could really feel present and let loose. But other than that, I was really wound up. And when I started drinking more in my early 20s, it really did foster the social side of myself, and I felt more present. It's weird because some people, when they drink, they're like, I don't like it because it makes me feel out of control, or like I'm not really present for things. I actually felt more present because I was usually so in my head all the time, and it kind of just took all of that overthinking away and allowed me to just enjoy the moment and actually have more genuine connections with people. And so in that regard, I think you're absolutely right. It's not only served me, but probably saved me from what could have been like deeper, darker depression or escalating anxiety at that moment in my life, And so I think that's important to hear, because I've always said to myself, like, my parents painted and I give them credit because it did keep me out of trouble as a teenager, but they always painted drugs and alcohol with a pretty broad brush. Like, it's all bad. And if you do it, essentially you're a bad person who's going to get into trouble, and your life's going to go in the shitter. And I always said to myself, if I ever had kids, or if I were talking to a young person, I would try to give them a more realistic reflection of what it is and what the relationship is, because there's a reason why people do it. They wouldn't do it if it weren't enjoyable, if it didn't serve you in some way. And for people that are in pain, if it pulls you out of pain, it serves you in that moment. If you're somebody who's nervous and anxious and it pulls you out of anxiety, it serves you in that purpose. But it's also important to remember how dangerous a dance that is, that you're playing with fire, and that it's not going to be that forever, that your relationship with that substance, while it can be very romantic and very intoxicating, literally and figuratively, it's like, dancing with a really dangerous mistress, where you're gonna of course they're beautiful and lovely and you're gonna have a wonderful night, but what is that going to lead to down the line if you commit your life to that? So yeah, I'm glad that you said that, because I don't know if we've really talked about that.
I was just going to say, I don't think I'd ever heard that sort of brought up in that way, and you both said it, that like if you think back realistically, that alcohol could have saved you from potentially more damaging mental health issues, whether it's, I don't know, it goes as far as self-harm or something, but you never think about, or you never hear people talk about it in that way, in terms of like, it was actually a pretty useful crutch for me to lean on, because I could have veered in a more dangerous direction. Obviously, it became something that was out of control, but it's an important thing to hear, because, like I said, I don't think I've ever heard it discussed in that way.
Sometimes you might hear people say that, like, drinking alcohol or doing drugs is actually just a symptom of being an alcoholic or an addict, right? Mm-hmm. So there are all of these things underneath that are driving us to escape, whatever that might be, be it booze or drugs or gambling or sex or whatever it is, right? But like the underlying issue, which is something that I really came to terms with when I met you in rehab at the Betty Ford Center, and then continue to study like all of these years later. We're dealing with all of these complex feelings and emotions and ways in which we're living, and ways in which we're like thinking about ourselves way too much and have these giant egos, and we're just trying to live like a happy and productive life. And all of these things exist without alcohol.
Yeah,
I guess is the point that I'm trying to make,
Well, I think also part of the process of really finding closure on the chapter of your life in which you were addicted, and being ready to say goodbye to that relationship that's not serving you anymore, is mourning that relationship in a effective way in which you have closure. And just like mourning the loss of a loved one, somebody that you had a relationship with, in the early stages, you tend to paint them in black and white terms. You look at it as like, I love this person so much, I'm going to miss them forever, they were perfect. or I hated this person. I'm not going to miss them at all. They were terrible to me. The reality is that people and your relationship with a substance are nuanced and complicated. And until you accept all of the different layers of it and really reflect on ways in which it served you and ways in which it did not serve you, you're not able to effectively mourn that relationship and find closure. And so I think it is important to look at, the relationship as a whole and see how it evolved from something that was serving you to something that wasn't serving you. So for you, as things escalated, I know that in the lead up to the time when we met, things had gotten pretty bad, obviously. And you had some medical issues as well as a result, or maybe at the time didn't know it was as a result. Can you tell us about that time in your life?
Sure, yeah. I was diagnosed with something called Guillain-Barré syndrome, like not that long before I met you, Ryan. But that is an autoimmune disease in which it's a neurological disorder where basically your immune system is mistakenly attacking your peripheral nerves. And, for me, that started in my lower extremities. So I woke up in the middle of the night, was also in the midst of like an incredible, low, sad bender, right? And woke up in the middle of the night and was like, oh my God, like I cannot feel my legs, and couldn't stand up, couldn't do anything, right? And, like a good alcoholic, I just kept on drinking and went back to bed.
Wow.
That went on for a couple days,
Wow. Amazing.
and I was like really, really fortunate. I had a good buddy of mine came into my room and was like, dude, what is going on? He was like, I was like, I can't stand up, can't feel my legs. And he was like, we got to go to a hospital. And I was like, no, I'm good, And he's like, no, we got to go like right now. So, I go to the hospital. They send me to in like Upper West Side. Through Columbia, they have a great like neurology department. So they they admitted me right there on the spot, and they weren't sure exactly what was going on, but the danger with this Guillain-Barré is that, it starts in your lower extremities. It has a tendency to move up your body, and once it hits your respiratory system, you're like, bad news. Yeah. So while I was there, I was also like, unknown to the doctors. I had or I say unknown now. Maybe I like walked in and was like reeked of booze. That's the more realistic situation there. But I started going through alcohol withdrawal while I was there also. So it added this whole other layer to an already complicated situation. So I was like hearing things and seeing things and like full on delirium tremens kind of thing, which in some ways, like what better place to be doing that than a hospital? But in other ways, it caused all sorts of complications with the stuff that was already going on. My parents were living in California at the time. They, of course, were, catching word of what was going on, and they flew out and, basically got a phone call with like a mortality rate percentage.
Jeez.
Which, I just like cannot even imagine being in their shoes for that whole thing, Ultimately I ended up being in the hospital. I think for the first time was like, I was in the hospital for like maybe a week and a half. And then, I got discharged, and then it started coming back worse, So I ended up back in the hospital and was, ultimately there for like a month or something like that. And started, they were giving me the right medications to the point where it started going away. But, recovery process from that then took like a really, really long time. It's like, I was in a wheelchair for a while after that, and was like, graduated to a cane, and all in all, it like took like probably close to a year to the point that I was like walking without a cane, and that was like a huge success.
Needless to say, you weren't playing the drums at all during this time. or were you at least trying to keep your
You know,
rudiments in your hands?
you know what's funny is I kind of was.
Really?
I can't say I was playing well. I do remember maybe 5 months or so into that whole thing, getting a call from my buddy Charles to do a studio session down in Baltimore. And I was like so thick-headed and quite frankly in denial about the whole thing. I was like, yeah, I'm fine, I'll do it. So I hopped on a bus and went down to Baltimore and got off the bus with a cane. And he's like, are you sure you're okay, man? As related to recovery, this was like a clear consequence of treating my body like a garbage can. It's tough with neurology for a doctor to really pinpoint exactly what's going on, but vitamin deficiencies can absolutely lead to something like this. And I was in a really, really bad place. It wasn't the first time I had ended up in a hospital with the DTs, so these consequences that happen, and the way that an alcoholic or addict can then convince themselves that it's still okay to drink. I'm sitting here now almost 9 years sober, and it's I look back on that and I'm like, man, why don't you just freaking stop, man? But I was fully incapable of doing that, which makes me both really grateful, but it also gives me a ton of empathy for people who are going through something like this, because I know what that feels like, and it is so tough to get out of that grip.
Well, you're describing a lot of layers of psychology that go on. There's clearly denial going on. You're like, it's not a problem, and you can rationalize ways in which it's okay to continue to drink. You mentioned you were in the midst of a deep, dark bender when this all went down. What did that look like? Where were you emotionally at this point? Because it sounds like even if you had denial on a certain level, there was awareness that there was really dark stuff going on underneath that. So what did your life look like in general? Where were you at psychologically amidst all that?
Yeah. I mean, well, I'll start by saying that I was playing in a lot of bands, and I would find myself, on the road for a number of weeks, and then I would come home to where I was living in Brooklyn, and I would have 2 weeks with nothing on the calendar, which is a really dangerous place to be
for sure.
Honestly, for anybody, but especially for someone who is trying to fight off this demon. So my drinking had gotten to a point where if I have one drink, I'm not running the show anymore. Some people can have one drink and stop. Maybe I was euphorically thinking of the times in my life in which I could have one or two and stop and maybe be cool for a couple of months. But that period of things being okay, as I mentioned earlier, had just shrunk and shrunk and shrunk. And, I have one drink, I can't stop drinking. That is alcoholism in a nutshell. And, all of this, it sounds really, really dark, and it is really dark. And I look back at all of this now with such gratitude. Yeah. Because it became so crystal clear to me that I'm not a person that can drink, and that I have to live a life in recovery, which, to me involves doing a lot of other things other than just not drinking, and that for me now has afforded me this big, beautiful life,
I love that.
So how does that part of your journey go? How do you end up finding that clarity? Was it in rehab? Was it after rehab? Where does the recovery part of your story actually start, and where does it go from there?
Well, I was one of those people. I got out of rehab. I stayed sober for a little bit, but I ended up doing some further experimentation,
Right.
which again, I do look back at that now with gratitude. It's whatever happened, was going to happen, had to happen for me to be able to reach this point of fully conceding to my innermost self that I'm an alcoholic, right? And that's different for everyone. But remind me your question one more time. I got off on a little tangent there.
So where did you finally find the clarity?
Where did I finally find it?
Acceptance
Yeah.
sort of
Great.
click, and where did that go? Yeah.
Great. So, after rehab, more experimentation, every time ended up in a really, really dark place, right? And ultimately for me, it was meeting other people who are sober. There's a bunch of people, there's a bunch of different ways that you can do that. There are recovery groups of all shapes and sizes, and it happened to be AA for me, which, I was living in New York at the time, and I started going to some AA meetings, and what like really did it for me, honestly, was like meeting a bunch of sober musicians. And people that were like out there doing this thing that I love, that I was a little crushed because I thought I wasn't going to be able to do it anymore in like a sober way.
Yeah.
I had counselors in the past be like, you should really think about doing something different for a living.
Oh, wow.
And that crushed me. I was like, I don't know how to do anything else. But then back to this community piece, it's like I start making these relationships with these people that are doing it in a healthy way, and they seem like mostly happy. And that was
Imagine
like,
that.
yeah, that was like incredibly encouraging to me. So I started surrounding myself with people like that. Through that, I started getting honest, like with other people and with myself. So that, that sober community is like, that was the piece for me.
Well, that leads me to the question that I really wanted to ask both of you about your friendship from coming from a place like that. I think of rehab as a extremely lonely place. I mean, never having gone through it, but as it's portrayed as that moment when you go into rehab, you're on your own. You're like a baby. Your pockets are empty. They go through your stuff. Your dignity is sort of gone. You're at this rock bottom. What does it feel like to maybe find not just a drummer in there, but a kindred spirit of someone who's in a similar place, that shared experience of going through it together? Is it, sort of like soldiers in a foxhole, that once you come out of it, you have this history that no one can take away, and no one, it's a shorthand. Talk a little bit about that, what it's like to have that after the fact, or as you guys were going through it, those relationships and those friendships that form.
Yeah, I mean, super, super powerful. I will say that I had been to some AA meetings before going to rehab, and I was always like too shy or scared or full of shame to say anything, right? I would kind of sit at the back and then leave before anyone could talk to me, right? And, being in rehab, it was like, Ryan and I would be in basically like a group therapy session. And you kind of had to talk.
Nowhere to hide.
And I think that put me in a place where like, okay, well, when I really start being honest about this stuff that is, quite frankly, was so lonely and isolating and shameful for my whole life, right? You start talking about that, and you look around the room, and you're in a room full of people that are all like nodding their head, right? Because they get it. And like that to me was so incredibly powerful, because I had talked to therapists and counselors before about all of this stuff, and those particular therapists or counselors, they hadn't lived it, or maybe they had and they weren't comfortable sharing that in a professional setting with a client. But there's something like so special about that shared experience, and just like knowing that you're not alone.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I'll say is that like those friendships for me, some of my closest friends in the world are sober people. Yes, there's like this shared traumatic past that we all deal with, but I find that people that are like actively in recovery they're like constantly working on themselves.
Yeah.
Right? So I know when I'm going through something, I call one of my sober buds, because they normally have some sort of experience that they can share with me, and then they never really do it in a way where they're like yelling at me, telling me what to do.
Yeah.
Ryan,
you have a similar take?
Yeah, well, I think the two things that you described are both true. I think, the first night in detox, or even the first week, can feel very lonely and feel very isolating, and all the things you described in terms of like loss of dignity, just like a lot of reflection, like how did I end up here? Do I belong here? Like should I even be here? But very quickly, as Davis described, you start to find connection in the people around you, and that is a powerful thing that you have. If you're there, your addiction has gotten to a place where you haven't felt that for a long time.
Right.
Because addiction is extremely lonely and isolating, and it may start in a lot of different places, but it always ends up in the same place, And for me, that was just, the spiritual disconnect from living and from people and from things that brought purpose and meaning into my life. And so all of a sudden, very little things become very meaningful because it's something you've been lacking. Just somebody being kind to you and relating to something you say. And like you said, nodding their head to something you're sharing because they understand, because they relate to it, is a powerful source of connection.
I bet.
And I remember even like a weekend, like watching the people who had been there for a month or two at the most, and they seemed to be like eons ahead of me in terms of what they'd gained from a little bit of sobriety. And they were, graduating the people who had been there and finished the program and sharing this fellowship with each other that it just seemed so beyond anything I had experienced in a long time, that I was so motivated and inspired by it. And I wanted to have that, and I wanted to be that, so much so that I think I overshot a little bit. I was like, well, I need to provide that for the new people coming in. And Davis, remind me if I'm wrong, I think you came in a little bit after me. I think maybe a week or two after I had been there. And tell me if you got this energy at all from me. But I feel like I wanted so badly for the newcomers to get from me what I had gotten from the people that were graduating, that I took it on myself to, like, I have to be the one that fosters the positive energy and really cultivates the spirit of what I walked into when I got here. And there were times when I felt like the energy was shifting and it was getting more splintered or more like dark. And I felt like a responsibility to be the one who was fostering that. And so much so that my psychiatrist, when I was describing this to him, he was like, who told you it was your responsibility to help everyone else in the dorm? Like, you're here to get sober. Like, that's your job. Yeah. What was your experience of that, Davis?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of what keeps this whole recovery thing going.
Yeah.
Is passing it along to the next person that's dealing with it. You pay it forward. There's a reason why, like, service, this act of service is like comes up in these recovery circles all the time. And it is just completely about helping other people. And that is like one of the things that I'm so freaking grateful for today, because I just think it's a really, really beautiful thing. And it doesn't matter if you're in a 12-step room or a different recovery circle, or if you don't have issues with alcohol or drugs or whatever, but just this general sentiment that you move around your day trying to help other people with your own experience, which is something that, like, I'm not an expert in anything, but I'm an expert in, like, my own lived experience. And if I can pass that along to other people in a way that might be helpful or useful to them, then I'm going to do that, And
that's not an experience that's exclusive to recovery and addiction. That's just being a good human on this planet Earth, is sharing your experience and connecting and relating to people who might be going through something that you say, hey, I've been through that. I can give you a little advice, or I can help. I can reach out my hand and pull you up. It's not just about recovery. So just a good note for everybody listening. Just be a good human.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, that's the way in which I think going through something as harrowing as addiction and finding recovery pays dividends beyond just finding sobriety, because I feel awoken to a lot of aspects of life that are rewarding that I would probably not have felt had I not gone through all of that. Because we can all be so wrapped up in our own all the time and more concerned with the problems that we have or the the things that we need to try to do for ourselves, that we lose sight of how rewarding it is to show up for other people and to actually be a good human being. And, whatever your value system is, it's whether you believe in energy in the universe or the laws of a specific religion or God or whatever. I think we can all agree that when you are putting good things out into the world, it comes back to you in one way or another. There is a reward for it. It's not just being truly altruistic. Like, we all grow and we all do better when we think of others in that way. And so service is powerful in terms of just finding that kind of fulfillment in life. And Davis, you described earlier how this whole journey has brought this new life, this beautiful life. Tell us about that. Like, what has transpired since then? How did it evolve to what you're doing now, and what are you doing now?
Sure. It used to drive me crazy when I would hear people say that they were a grateful alcoholic. Mainly because when I was new to it, it was like the worst frickin' thing that ever happened to me, right? But being a little bit on the other side of that now, I've kind of come to realize that if I have any like really high highs or really low lows, I'm kind of at risk of acting out. That could be drinking, that could be wallowing in self-pity or this or that. And like really living in a life of recovery, I have to like take care of things before they get too low or they get too high, right? And I've found through years of doing that I've developed like really great relationships with other people. I've like repaired relationships that I thought were torn to the ground because of my alcoholism. And I've been able to like say yes to a lot of things that I didn't really think were possible. I'm sitting here right now in a recording studio in Boulder, Colorado, and I just opened up a music school here in Boulder.
Wow.
Right. So I'm like a small business owner helping, I've got two teachers that I've hired. I'm someone's boss, which is like crazy, and my whole mission with this school is not necessarily to like create the next kid that's going to go to the fancy music school. It's to harvest community, right? And spark like a little bit of joy and creativity in the people in my direct community, right? So, gosh, I mean, there are so many other things. It's like I have hobbies now outside of music. I got really into trail running and rock climbing and all of these things that are like really making my life really, really full. And, bringing it back to that community piece, these are all things that just like connect me to other people in a way that feels meaningful to me,
Wait, I don't want you to sell yourself short, Davis, because I think I remember you telling me you're not just trail running like I'm going out on the weekend. Don't you run ultra marathons and 100-mile races and things?
I do, yes, which is like I've run one 100-miler.
Oh,
Let's
only
be clear
one.
on that. Let's be
Slacker.
clear on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. A number of ultra marathons, which is like, anything longer than a marathon. And it's, they're typically out in the mountains, which is like, one of the big reasons why my wife and I moved out here to Colorado is just to like be around things that we love,
That's incredible.
Well, as one great addict once said, anything worth doing is worth overdoing, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's another thing that I've had to like think about my relationship with,
Extremes.
Yeah, extremes. But, I think about my reason for running to what might seem like excess to a lot of people. And, my reason now is like, it's just like it's an efficient way to move through the mountains.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah,
it.
okay.
Like I wake up and I see Green Mountain here in Boulder, and like when I'm in good shape, I can run up there and have an experience,
Wow.
and
That's so cool.
that's what I love. I'm not like staring at my watch all the time and like seeing how fast I can go. It's like the experience of being out there and doing something in nature, usually with other people, you know?
And the fact that you can probably listen to your body, that you say it's not excess, it's the thing that your body is craving. And I love that idea of you saying you now have like an automatic kind of a signal that goes off when I'm getting too low or getting too high, and you can anticipate that and do the work to sort of stop it before you either sink into those depths or overdo something. And that's a great skill to have, right? And to like, sometimes I see, with my wife, we're starting to get into an argument, and I'll go, I see where this is headed. I want to I'll pump the brakes. I'll be the person to stop this before it escalates to a ridiculous fight over closing the dishwasher or something. You know what I mean? So it's a good skill to have, that ability to see when things are going off the rails one way or the other, and to be able to pump the brakes a little bit. Yeah.
Totally. I mean, it's still something I'm working on every day, but for sure.
Well, certainly in my mind, running 100 miles seems like a lot, but it's a long way away from laid up in bed with legs that don't work, and
Right.
rationalizing that you can still drink even though it's incredible that what life can bring to you once you have that acceptance and you start just walking in the other direction.
Or running.
Running in the other direction. We've come full circle. Earlier we were talking about, being in school and having good teachers, and what you learned from, fostering that relationship of this isn't just discipline. It's also about joy and connection and community. So what do you bring into you as a teacher, you as somebody who's owning and operating this school, of what you learned in your schooling and in your experience? Like how does that manifest now in what you do professionally?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think I'll start by saying that I somewhat reluctantly took a teaching job at a music school in New York when I was like days sober, because I didn't want to be on the road, because that seemed dangerous, I needed to like stay put. I got this job, and what I realize now is it like really got me out of myself. I had to like stop thinking, even though I was in like a really low place, it was really helpful to not be thinking about myself. This particular school, awesome school in Brooklyn called Brooklyn Music Factory. It's very songwriting focused. So I was like pretty low, but I would show up to work and I would like write a song with an 8-year-old about like a dog that they saw, or whatever it was, it got me out of myself. And I was like, this kind of comes back to that service piece. It's like, I was like doing everything I could to just like give this kid and their family a little bit of joy, That's largely what I'm trying to do with this place. As I mentioned, it's like my goal isn't to like create the next kid that's going to go on to Juilliard. Will it happen? Maybe. I don't know. There might be some kids that go to Berkeley or whatever. That's fine. But the main goal is just like giving a little bit of joy to the people in my direct community, and also like connect them with other people. So there's a lot of collaboration that happens. It did wonders for me. My best friends in the whole world, for some reason, are people that I have played music with. I think it just like creates this like unshakable bond. Still talk with my high school band, middle school band, guys in my college band, the guys that you saw me play with in LA. Like a couple of those guys I've been playing with since I was 19.
Wow.
And we're also like a part of my recovery story. They were there for me, and so I just feel like I owe so much to the community that brought me up. A lot of that was within the musical community and the relationships that like formed out of that. And it's what I want to pass along to other people.
Well, I think you're doing it.
And somehow amidst all of this, you've been able to continue to perform and tour. You mentioned at a certain point that might have been an unhealthy idea for you. So how do you do that now? What does touring look like for you? How do you maintain that lifestyle and balance those things?
I mean, I am so fortunate now. I just have a complete position of neutrality around drugs and alcohol. You know, it's like I don't crave it. I don't need it. I can be around it. And it's fine, right? As long as I have a good reason to be there, then I'm gonna be there. So being on the road, it's like, yeah, people party. It's not. I've also noticed as we've gotten older, the parties have dwindled a little
Yeah,
bit.
for sure.
You
Yeah.
know, but it's still like I take no shame in being the first person to go to bed. People are out drinking. Nobody cares. I try to run a lot when I'm on the road. Like very frequently. I'll
Great way to see a city, I bet. A new city.
Oh my God, it's unreal. It's like a lot of times we'll be on the road in Europe or something. It's like we've got 3 hours in The Hague, right? from like
Sounds
from
like the
like
start of a movie.
Yeah.
yeah.
3 hours in The Hague.
3 hours in The Hague. From like the hours of like you wake up on the tour bus and you got to load in at noon, right? And it's like, I can have a little bit of alone time, run around the city, see a lot of it, and show up at soundcheck. And then it's like, and then you leave right after the show. So it's like, I call it speed tourism.
Right. Now, the last thing we haven't touched on is that amidst all this also, I was really happy to hear when we last spoke that you found a partner in life.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Yeah. Carly is my partner. She is amazing. We met through rock climbing. Another thing that both of us are super into. So we met in Brooklyn.
Known hot spot of rock climbing.
Yeah, she's awesome. She's great. She's way smarter than I am. She's way out of my league.
It's good to know those things.
But she, I met her when I was sober for about a year. So she never really saw this side of me, but it is like absolutely one of the biggest perks of like living a life of recovery is like developing these like true, pure relationships and living that way. It's like it is the most honest and true relationship that I've ever had.
Wow.
So she's not in recovery herself.
No.
That's, I get that question a lot when people ask me about what I would look for in a relationship. They're like, do they need to be sober too? Like, and I'm always like a little bit surprised by that question. I'm like, well, I guess it makes sense. A lot of people in your life, when you're in recovery yourself, your friends are people that are also in recovery, and you find a bond from that shared perspective and history. But what's your feeling about that in romantic relationships? Obviously, it's not.
I mean, my feeling is that the whole reason you do this recovery thing is so that you can go out and live in the world.
Yeah.
So it's like whatever happens in a therapy room or an AA room or a NA room or whatever it is, none of that shit really matters. It's like what you do when you leave the room that actually matters, right? Yeah. So I mean, Carly doesn't. She like rarely drinks. She occasionally, maybe like once a month, will like have a glass of wine and like won't finish it, and it'll be on the coffee table the next morning. I'm like, well, that's what it looks like to not be an alcoholic.
Well, that's lovely, and it's just so nice to hear the whole arc of the story, to see how it begins, where it can take you, when it gets bad, and to see the blessings that come when you find the other side of it. And I'm just so happy for you and grateful to have met you and see this arc of your recovery and see what it's brought into your life. And it's just lovely to catch up with you. So thank you.
Likewise, Ryan. I was so psyched to see you guys in LA. You look at the odds of recovery and they're not really stacked in your favor, right?
Yeah.
So you meet someone in rehab and like the odds of you and I sitting here talking about this stuff on the other side of it are like pretty freaking low.
Yeah.
So it has just been like such a joy to catch up with you and see everything that you're doing in your life. That is like, correct me if I'm wrong, but a direct result of making some pretty big changes.
Absolutely. All right. Well, Davis, thank you again. This has been really great. And, I haven't met your lovely Carly, but send my love anyway.
Oh, I will.
Mine too.
Yes.
All right. Davis Rowan has been our guest on today's episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. Check out new episodes every Tuesday. We'll see you next time right here on the Harder to Breathe podcast.
Hey guys, Duck here. Thank you so much for watching this episode of the Harder to Breathe podcast. If you liked what you saw, feel free to go ahead and click the links here on the screen for older episodes, and be sure to subscribe. Click that subscribe button and you'll get notification about new episodes as they come out every Tuesday. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time on the Harder to Breathe podcast.